Episode 1, Preventing Violence. Segment 1, What is Violence Prevention? Segment 2, Cultural and Community Connectedness. Segment 3, On the Ground. For generations, American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian peoples have faced an ongoing crisis of violence, human trafficking, and an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous people, also known as MMIP. In fact, Native Americans face a disproportionately high rate of violence. The lasting impact of this ongoing crisis can be felt across Indian country, urban areas, and beyond. More work must be done in order to build safe and healthy tribal communities and keep our Indigenous people and communities whole. My name is Chance Rush, Executive Director of Our Native Men. I'm Hidatsa and enrolled with the 3 affiliated tribes on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. Join us as we consider a path away from repairing the damage that violence causes and start to consider how we, together, can begin the work of keeping us whole. During this podcast series, I will be your guide throughout the country as we speak to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island on how we can engage proactively to prevent MMIP. We'll speak with tribal leaders, community organizers, academic experts, and of course, our partners at the Administration for Native Americans, the Department of Health and Human Services, and other government agencies engaged in this work. Episode 1, Preventing Violence. Segment 2, Cultural and Community Connectedness. This segment will explore what culture and community have to do with violence and violence prevention. It will also discuss the kind of resources Indigenous communities have to prevent violence and how community members can take advantage of these resources. Episode 1, Preventing Violence. Segment 2, Cultural and Community Connectedness. Please welcome Sheldon Spotted Elk, member of the Northern Cheyenne community, Program Director, National Council of Justice and Family Court Judges, and Tribal Justice Partnerships. Hey. How's everybody doing out there? Chance Rush in the building. I want to give a big shout out to the Administration for Native Americans. This program on Chance with Greatness, keeping us whole here. Keeping us whole. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Sheldon Spotted Elk, who is our Director, Tribal Justice and Partnerships, National Council of Juvenile and Family and Court Judges. He's with us today, UNM grad, also a social worker, man. I have to probably talk to him a little bit about his social work days, man, from social work to law. Wow. Man, that's super native right there, right? So he's in the building with us. He's coming to us out of Denver, Colorado. But again, I just want to give a big shout out to the Administration for Native Americans and my nonprofit, Our Native Men. This is a podcast series, Keeping Us Whole, preventing missing and murdered Indigenous persons. Again, we're very grateful to have this gentleman with us in our program today. Very busy person, travels throughout the United States, also has a big responsibility in his communities. He's also a 40 under 40 recipient from the National Center. That is very hard to accomplish as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as an advocate. I'll tell you this right now, that is a very special feat to receive. It's a national award that is presented to 40 individuals under 40 years old. And the pot is great Indian leaders throughout the country, right? So I've been trying to convince the National Center to do a, 1 under 47 award. I don't know if they'll ever do that, but anyway, I'm going to let him introduce a little bit of himself to us. So without further ado, please bring to the podcast, the platform, boss man himself, Sheldon Spotted Elk. Come on out here, Sheldon. Hey, I like doing that. I like pushing that button right there. So. Sheldon, how you doing, man? How have you been?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for having me on. This is exciting. I'm doing all right, holding up during COVID.
Yeah, yeah. How's Denver? How's the boys? How's everything
Hey,
going with you?
thank you. Yeah, have two sons, one 16, one 12. One plays basketball. They kind of have diverse interests, so they keep me busy that way. One plays a lot of basketball, and the other one plays the saxophone, and they both kind of are really excelling in that. And so it's exciting to be part of their lives and seeing all their progress that they're making. So yeah, that's kind of the highlight of my life, actually. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah. Well, man, it absolutely should be the highlight of your life. There's nothing like fatherhood,
That's
right? There's
right.
there's
That's
there's
right.
absolutely nothing like fatherhood. I know that I've got to ask before I get into my questions with you. How did you go from social work into law? Why was that important? I know that I think you were at Utah, and then not only that, you go to one of the hardest law schools out in Albuquerque. So what was the meaning? What's the purpose going from social work to law?
Actually, probably it's probably similar to your story. I know a little bit that I've read about you and know about you is like I wanted to work with youth. So at one point I did work with actually kids that were locked up, in the highest like lockup facility in Utah. So I was a counselor at basically a youth prison, and realized that change was really hard from that position. And I really just saw how terrible that was, and that there needed to be some systemic change. And I thought of like, what can I do to do that? And law school seemed like was a good opportunity. There is a natural tie to that. Actually, social work education so much about law and policy, and it's easy parlay to go to law school and learn about the underpinnings of it. Law school ends up being kind of an education and white supremacy, though. So it's kind of really difficult to go through that process to go unscathed, especially learning federal Indian law is kind of an exercise in white supremacy. So
Hmm.
a lot of what I ended up learning and how I made that relevant to me is, and it's something that I'm even working on today in 2021 and 2022, is like, how can we make our systems more indigenous and more proximate to tribal values and culture? And so that's kind of what my same tune that I've been whistling for about 10 years now, so how can we do that? I've written articles about it. How can our tribal constitutions, which in many cases were boilerplate constitutions that were given to tribes and saying, fill in the blank, write your tribe in all these places. For Northern Cheyenne, there's actually 28 provisions in there where there's references to superintendent approval, BIA superintendent approval, and how much sovereignty do you have when you constantly have to go to BIA to get approval. And those codes and laws and constitutions should be all proximate to our cultural values. So, and we see outcomes of that, and not only economic development, but we see positive outcomes, correlations around child welfare. Some of the work that I'm directly involved in right now, that when our laws are more proximate, that there's more medicine. Doesn't
Right.
seem like it's too
Right.
far to reach.
Yeah, you said two words that kind of stood out. You said our medicine and our laws. I also saw that you got your certification in Indian law. What can we learn about that? Share about your certification in that.
Yeah, so they have a program, one of the oldest programs at University of New Mexico, of first federal Indian law program. A lot of the professors that I had there, like I said, it ended up kind of making me be aware of not only, so federal Indian law is a law that's really kind of formed by executive action, by Supreme Court orders, congressional law, but it really made me be conscious and cognizant of like, what can tribes do to cultivate our values? And so Indigenous law, how can we cultivate that and make that more present and relevant? So yeah, I did get the certificate and learned a lot about federal Indian law, but it kind of ended up having this opposite effect of making me think about the system from a different perspective, from our community's perspectives.
Yeah, and I think that could be okay. I think you got to see both sides of the fence, and you kind of have to understand both I guess perspectives, like you said. One thing that kind of no, it doesn't really scare off a lot of our young advocates, but we sometimes we get more reactive about things and responsive about things. But sometimes you have to go sit at the table. You have to go sit at the table to talk policy and to see other perspectives. Why, if you can give some people some encouragement on the importance of going and sitting at those tables that they don't necessarily want to sit at.
Oh boy, yeah. Yeah, I think that's critical. I was fortunate actually. My father, who's an educator, like it was kind of a rare thing actually. He was an elementary school teacher, so having a native man as an elementary school teacher is kind of a rare thing. It doesn't happen very often, and so I was fortunate to have him at my dinner table at night and teaching me about the value of education and kind of engendering uh, educational curiosity, intellectual curiosity. So I've always kind of been interested in that and like learning about how other people see the world and all those things. So I think that's kind of it, is just having a general intellectual curiosity or an educational curiosity about things and how things work, whether that's technology or whether that's law and policy. So I think that's kind of what I would say about that to anybody that's curious and learning more.
Yeah, and we have to do that. And I know we're going to get into my questions with you, but it's not often I get to talk to an Indian lawyer. I know plenty of them, and I'm glad I just caught you during a break, or you know with just to have a little time with you. So just to sit with you, it's important for us to who are advocating out here, and who want to bring awareness to things. Is there's always It's unfortunate, there's always that legal side of you know uh pushing our efforts, and just understanding it. I know that's one of the reasons why you got into it, is to see both sides, to put yourself in a non-native perspective, to for fight for things in a native perspective. So um so grateful, and all the work that you do. And you know working in the juvenile justice system, working with families, and judges and the legal system. It's a whole collaborate effort, and I guess what inspire I might have asked that already, but what inspired you? I mean, was there something that you went through, or is there something, just friends or family? What brought you to this outreach?
I think culturally, so I'm Northern Cheyenne, but I grew up most of my life near Navajo country, actually in San Juan
Okay.
County, Utah. And I grew up actually, it's kind of cool. You're painting in the background there, Billy Mills. Like I grew up reading about Billy Mills, grew up reading about Jim Thorpe. Like, in fact, like I said before, my dad, he was kind of like my hero as well. Like he played basketball. I played basketball too. I went played junior college basketball before I went to got my social work degree. So, and that was kind of my whole life growing up, is a lot about basketball. And it ends up being a lot of what you learn on the court kind of parlays into life. Actually, my cool story is my chance with greatness is one time I ran into Billy Mills,
Yeah.
and he knows, like, that guy has such a great memory. Like he has such
Right.
like he knows everybody too, and so he
Right.
knows my dad. He's like knows my dad really well, and I've always been jealous. Like whenever my dad would go on a trip, he would come home. He's like, "Oh, I saw Billy Mills," and I'd be like, "Oh my goodness, I wanted to see Billy Mills. I want to autograph with
Right.
Billy Mills." So never saw him all the way until I became an adult, and I actually applied to law school. So I went to this one law school. I'll make this story really short too,
Yeah, go
but
ahead.
it's
Now we got time. I want to hear this story. Yeah.
yeah, it's a good story actually. And so I go to visiting law schools, and so I go up to this law school, and as I'm taking the tour of the law school, on the cork board, and just in the general law school, it says Billy Mills speaks today, and he's speaking at like the fraternity house down the across campus.
Wow.
And so I'm like,
Wow.
forget this law school tour. I don't want to go to this law school anyway. So I totally skip out of the law school tour and run to the Billy Mills lunch discussion. And I walk in the background, literally walk through the back door of this fraternity house. At the point I used to have long hair, so I had these little two braids. And as soon as I walked in, man, he caught my eye. Like he looked at me. It seemed like his speech that he was given that day was for me. He talked about the greatest poverty that Indian country faces is the poverty of hope. He talked about how he was orphaned as a young child and set high aspirations to become an Olympic gold medalist. And it just blew me away, like hearing him speak in real life. And I wanted to go like get close to him. I wanted to get proximate to Billy Mills, so I wanted to go just say thank you. I didn't know what I wanted to say to him. I actually just wanted to give him a hug or something, so I
Right.
purposely waited to be the last one to ask a question. And he kept on looking at me like, your turn. And I'm like, no, these guys can go first. So like everybody's asking him questions about running and all this. And finally it's my turn. And when it's my turn, it was such a cathartic moment for me that I just immediately just started blabbing out my whole life story to him. Like I started talking nonstop to him, and I told him how I grew up in a community that was really racist, and I
Mm-hmm.
encountered that. But Billy Mills gave me hope because he won an Olympic gold medal that I could set goals. And I set a goal to play college sports. I wanted to get a scholarship to play basketball. And I feel like Billy Mills gave me the permission to do it. And then I went to school and got a college degree. And I feel like that was part of Billy Mills's too. And then I even told him, like, after blabbering on for like 15 minutes straight without him even saying a word, I said, now I've applied to law school and I've been accepted to go to law school. And it's like one of my dreams, and I want to work in Indian country. And I think that's because of you too. And at this point, I had tears running down my cheek. And I'll never forget what he said to me for the rest of my life. I'll never forget what Billy Mills said to me. He reaches over and put his arm around my shoulder. He said, son, I'm kind of losing my hearing in this ear, and I didn't hear a damn word you had to say.
Yeah.
But I was proximate, and I was close.
Right. Well, I think it's safe to say that, both of us, we're respected by Billy, and it's because, we allowed him to mentor us, and because we have so much respect for him. And that the biggest thing too, Sheldon, is that, we see him as a person first. We see him as a friend first before an icon, because he truly is, and just for, him to inspire both of us to be in the capacities that we're in, we do owe a lot to, the one and only Mr. Billy Mills. So, man, it's good to be part of that, in that brotherhood there, that, someone has passed something on to us, and you know what, it's our duties too, Sheldon, for us to pass it on to other people, to pass on that outreach. And, we're not in our, early 20s anymore, where we can just show up at a tournament and ball out and, not back down. But I'll tell you right now, I know that we're still not afraid to get on the court with anybody. I mean, we may be a step slower, but, we're still at it, But
might get hurt at the end, but yeah, we'll still ball.
I know. I know I will get hurt at the end, so, just a few questions for you, Sheldon. What do culture and community have to do with violence? And that's got kind of a quick question. What does culture and community have to do with violence?
Wow. I see it as a protective factor. I see it as a resiliency factor. There's a lot of evidence actually to support this as well. I think if you, the casual observer that doesn't really maybe not even know very much about history, there was a colonial project, an assimilation project waged by the United States of America against Indian tribes. I don't know, actually, I've never met one Native person that wasn't touched by that. Actually, that isn't a part of a connection to the boarding school experience, which we know that many of those children never came home. We know also, the thing that we know is that adverse childhood experiences, if you don't know about that study and you're listening to this, you should Google it, So It's a study that looks at these 10 factors. We know that some of those things happen a lot more to American Indians than non-natives. And that has serious impacts on health, mental health, physical health. And so culture for me, I come from a Sundance tribe. I come from a giveaway tribe, has been an incredible healing thing for me. The fundamentals of what a Sundance is. And I'm speaking I'm punching way above my weight by even saying that, but just, fundamentally for me, it's about the ceremony of connecting to humanity, and it's about the ceremony of connecting to the earth, and so, you could look at our society right now in general of how a lot of people are lacking that. We could look at global warming and how that impacts of our lack of connection to the earth is impacted by that. And we look at just some of the things around mental health in our general society, how the lack of humanity has impacted that as well. So I feel like maybe the Cheyenne contribution to the world is not only that we killed Custer, but we have this model for humanity,
Right.
And so our great two gifts to humanity here,
Right. Hey, you got to throw that in there. You got to throw that in there. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
One thing, I was talking to a gang prevention specialist, and you can probably elaborate on this a little bit if you want, but, he said, a lot of people see these, gangs on reservations, that they see them as wannabes, but they're real gang members. I mean, they're, did you have any stories on anything that you came across like that, or any studies or anything like that about, gangs on Indian reservations?
Yeah, it's a serious issue. I used to provide legal representation to young people that were involved in delinquency on a reservation, and definitely all those many of those kids were gang involved and actually doing. You might say, oh yeah, they're wannabes, but when they're committing real acts of like physical
Yeah.
violence to people, that's some real stuff. That's not wannabe stuff. That's real stuff, you know. And
Right.
when they're
Yeah.
bringing drugs and alcohol and uh, things into communities that probably wouldn't have them there otherwise, that's some activity. You know, there's a bootleg industry sometimes in communities kind of supplied by organized gangs, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah.
on the flip side, I grew up around a lot of, me included, you know, just I look back at that as a way of like, I had connection, I had family. I viewed many of my young friends as family, you know, like even though we would get in trouble, like we
Yeah.
were, that's community, that's family, you know, and some of those kids are the most loyal people I've ever met in my entire life, you know, so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
even to this day.
Well, and also just to kind of go off what you were saying, yeah, they're committing real acts, and a lot of it is really going on. And I've always wondered, was it the legal system, the law enforcement, whether they were related to them or just slapped them on the wrist, like don't do it again, or whatever it may be. I mean, um, I don't I don't think a lot of our tribal communities allow gang violence to kind of for these individuals to get away with it. But I think I don't know. I think there's some of these communities may be laxed a little bit, and just kind of let them, hey, just you guys quit, put it down, quit, don't do that no more, But we've got to take it all serious, and and but also you said another thing is you talked about Mother Earth, and you talked about our communities. I think one way too is to prevent a lot of this is just continue to teach more of our language and more of our ways, and go back to the old ways as often as we can. Talk about the importance of being privileged to be indigenous.
That's right. I think there's so much power in proximity, and I'm still in that from actually Brian Stevenson, who's the lawyer that does a lot of work around truth and reconciliation in the Black community, definitely in Indigenous communities, the need for truth and reconciliation, and for not only people that want to work with Indian country, but all of us to become proximate to culture. I think there's power in that. You know, there's medicine in that, healing medicine in that, if you
Right,
will. You know,
right.
so. Um, I look at, like, I know that recently I just saw a data point that 30% of our American Indians live on reservations, you know, so the vast majority of us live in cities, and so we find community and maybe in an urban setting. But I look at our tribal communities of how we could benefit and develop restorative justice practices. Maybe we can't control what the state system's doing, you know, but what are we doing in our tribal communities to, because that's our cultural value. That's a Cheyenne cultural value. You wouldn't throw somebody away, you know, um, like
Yeah,
how do we
yeah.
restore that and create an illegal model that's based on restorative practice and doing things with and investing into people, as opposed to being punitive to them or not doing anything at all, or doing things for them, you know, like that sweet spot is when you do something with somebody, you know, that's restorative practice, you know.
Right, right. It was so crazy. I'll just kind of go off what you just said too. Is like when I lived in North Dakota, I lived in Indian housing. I lived in a tribal community. When I came to Oklahoma, I moved to where my mom's from, which is a northern with Southern Arapaho. So we're Cheyenne Arapaho tribe down here in the El Reno area, and I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't know if there's such a term of the Indian hood. It was the Indian hood. We lived all on Hope Ave, and I was kind of already grown up and out the door, but I would go back and I would work with young people in our neighborhood, and there were four boys. Maybe six of them, but four of them. I gained their respect. And did things with them. Whether it was take them out to eat, or go for walks with them, or play basketball with them, or whatever it may be. They're receptive of that. Any young person that's in an environment, they're receptive to things. If there's things that are negative, they'll go over there. If there's things that are positive, they want to see what's going on over there. And I think, one of my next questions to you is, what kind of resources does Indigenous communities have to prevent violence?
I think,
And I'm pretty broad.
well, currently, if we're talking like concrete resources that the federal government through their trust responsibility is providing, the Biden administration just recently, and I'm talking a couple of days ago, and if you're getting this on a delay, we're talking about mid-November. The Biden administration released an executive order outlining their plan of action towards addressing MMIW, VAWA, violence against women reauthorization. There's a Supreme Court decision that has big impacts in your state, Oklahoma, McGirt's, and how do we fund justice in those communities that are now exercising a lot more cases than they were exercising pre-McGirt, So I know those funding avenues are available to get on and develop. I think concretely, and these numbers might be a little bit off. So if I get this number exactly wrong, and you're a wonk and you're listening to this and you're like, man, you got that wrong, Sheldon, forgive me. But It's about 29 jurisdictions right now, 29 tribal jurisdictions of the 400 tribal courts. So there's 574 tribes. 400 of those jurisdictions have tribal courts approximately. And only 29 of those jurisdictions, if you're following the numbers with me, that the listeners here, 29 of them have VAWA jurisdiction, and that means they could prosecute non-Indian offenders that are coming onto their community. Mind you, the VAWA rights that you have as a violent offender, if you're non-native and you commit domestic violence against your intimate partner on a reservation, that's the highest legal rights that you get through the whole country, honestly, is like what tribes have to provide non-Indian offenders in tribal courts. And so that's something we need to think about, I think, as a federal, the feds need to think about that, of like, man, like how could we provide more equity in that? And I know there's some racial bias around that too, but so 29 courts have that jurisdiction. So there's a vast majority of jurisdictions that don't necessarily have the ability to do that right now. So I think the feds and they're providing resources and technical assistance to help cultivate. That's somewhat what Biden administration is outlining of how they could help promote and sustain domestic violence programs so they can become VAWA jurisdictions. But it's something that needs to be addressed on a vast majority.
Right. And you talk about concrete and federal, but also what can we do? What can we do as tribal community members? What's some resources that, that we can show to prevent violence in our tribal communities?
Man, that's a good question, Chance. I actually want to hear your response on that too.
Okay.
I'll quickly tell you though, I went to this a couple of years ago, pre-COVID. I went to this. This is my answers. I'm still in this answer from a Cheyenne tribal member here. So I got to take all these young people up to Seattle, and they did this panel, because they all participate in the Sand Creek Massacre Run. And so I'm a descendant of that, and all these young people are too. And so every year they do this healing run that's coming up at the end of the month of November. Thinking about it. And at the very end of this, these kids are so impressive. They're so poised and answered all the questions great. And then there was a guy in the back, and he's kind of this capitalist guy. And he's like, hey, what do you guys want to be when you grow up? And they asked Hayden. Hayden was the first guy to answer this question. And his answer to this, I feel like, is what we all need to answer, is he said, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? Well, I live in my community next to my grandma. I have all my nephews and nieces around me, and I have a lot of friends and relatives around me. When I grow up, I want to be a good relative. And I think that's what we all could do as far as and so not a fireman, not a lawyer, not a judge, any of those things, but being a good relative, being a good human being. I think that's our duty and our responsibility of what we individually can do to address that. But what do you think?
Well, I'm just to kind of, man, I'm impressed with that young man that said that, Hayden, who said that, because, that's the biggest part of our legacy. We can, be actors, we can be lawyers, we can be in charge of, some great things, but the biggest part of your legacy is your character, and that's where the good relative comes in. And I agree with you, just on the things that, we could do. I know that it's unfortunate, Sheldon, a lot of times that we have to, reach out to the mental health field and the federal government in some areas, and whatever it may be, to get resources. But the biggest resource is the heartbeat of the community, and to kind of going back with those young men, that I worked with in my community, 6 of them, 4 of them, man, we grew really, really close. And what it was, brother, it was like just paying attention to them, and just know that it's nickel and dime. The resources that are provided in indigenous communities to prevent things isn't, sweeping the neighborhood with cops, or, making commitments and making all these promises. What it simply is, Sheldon, is like exactly what you said: nickel and dime, little by little, be there, be an inspiration, small but surely. And of the 4, this is crazy. I like to get into stories. And so what I like about you too, Sheldon, is like, you like to get into stories. But one time, my mother, everyone moved out of the house. My mom was getting a little older, and those 4 young men in my community, they told me, I came over and they were sitting out on the front porch. Right. And they were like, we just want to let you know that your mom will never have to worry about mowing her lawn. Your mom will never have to worry about anybody breaking into her house. Your mom will never have to worry about people cutting across her lawn. Your mom will never have to worry about, coming out and telling people to be quiet. Because when your mom's home, we're going to give her the utmost respect for what you've done for us in our upbringing. And, I don't know what type of, situations those 4 young men were in other avenues. But if we could do that, if we could just know that things come full circle. So be careful how you treat them. Be careful what you teach them, because it's going to come back around. Think about it, Sheldon. Think about people that you come across that probably never thought that you were going to make it. People that you came across that, kind of try to weigh you down so much. And now it's like you get to face them as, Sheldon the man, and honestly, things come full circle. And I think that's a key word in resource. The resource is understanding things will come full circle. If it's bad, it's going to be bad. If it's good, it's going to be great. Right. So
that's right. Oh, I was going to say that. I was going to say you, man. I think you're the example for that, right? You're acting with Leonardo DiCaprio, man. You're out there doing your thing. So.
Yeah, man. I don't live, man. That makes me mad. I don't live, but
No, but I think like to that there's an old adage that hurt people, right? But I think conversely, healed people have the ability to provide healing, So I think definitely the legacy that you're leaving in your community, the thing that I think Hayden, that example of being a good relative, I think that has ripple effects that you probably don't even know, can't even imagine.
Man, I'm going to do that. I'm really going to do better by being a good relative. One thing that I've been doing these past couple of days, I never really thought about it, but we moved into this house not too long ago, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do what got me here. And so I used to always get up and pray with, some sage, just a little bit. And so these past couple of days, I've been just walking around in the morning, just a little bit, walking through every room, and used to do that all the time, but the reason why I say that is because that's what builds the good relative, is going back to the basics, the little by littles, and just let it grow again. Because you know what? When we get in a situation, and I'm sure that, I know I've been there. I'm not sure you've been there, but sometimes we kind of, grow up a lot, and then we stop and we kind of look at that old neighborhood and we're like, dang, let me slow down. Even though we have those responsibilities, like, man, let me slow down a little bit and let me go back to the basics again. So I do see your success, Sheldon, just by, the heart that you have and the goodness and the good medicine that you give. And we really do appreciate you, being out here advocating for us. And, before I let you go, I was just going to ask you is, what can we do as community members to be good relatives? What are some things that we could do?
Well, I think what you're modeling, actually, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I've learned a lot just talking to you today too, as well, as like I do this work and I'll connect it to this other work that I'm part of. But concretely, we are trying to teach lawyers, and I think this is the model that I feel like is a successful model, is like, how do we have a listen first orientation in society? And you're talking about these young men that you work with, so you can't quantify being able just to be a friend that's listening to somebody. Lawyers have a client that they usually represent. And so how could you really listen to your client about what the legal representation ends that they want to get, so that type sometimes takes cultural humility, like, and if you walk around with a humble heart, if you're walking around with prayer in your heart, like you're talking about, like, I think it gives you that orientation that you're willing to listen first and be able to sincerely engage people. Connected to some of the work that I'm involved with, and I do want to just quickly to give a plug for that, is there's 16 ICWA courts throughout the country. And so the vast majority, like the stat that we shared earlier, 70% of Indian country lives in cities, meaning they live in state jurisdictions, or they live off reservation, they live in state jurisdictions. And so the Indian Child Welfare Act is a federal law that applies in state courts. And so we're trying to build courts that comply not only with the letter of that law, but also with the spirit of that, putting humanity at the very core of that. So we're working with 16 of these courts right now. We're always trying to recruit more. We always need people that are anxious about, or not anxious, or that were anxiously engaged, anxiously engaged in the fight towards humanity, the fight towards anti-colonization, anti-racism, so we're always trying to work with those people. So if you're interested in doing that, look me up. We want you to be a part of this movement, because we're hoping to revolutionize the way that child dependency law is practiced for all people. They do say ICWA is the gold standard of child welfare. And I feel like Indigenous peoples, we could lead on that, and that's our gift,
Yeah, absolutely. And, ICWA, I mean, goodness, it's, without ICWA, which is Indian Child Welfare Act, it'd be pretty rough, and I know that there's a lot of battles, but the most important thing is these children, and, preventive measurements, educating them, teaching them before, the trouble does arise, or, and that's just with anybody, anybody out there. So, but man, go ahead. You gonna say something?
I was just gonna say, I got to run into one time. Quick story. I'll make it this short.
No, I like them. I like the stories. What are you talking about?
Yeah, we both come from a storytelling tradition,
right,
man. This is how it works. Yeah. So I ran into one of the lawyers that put pen to paper and wrote ICWA. I had lunch with him. It was one of those lunches that turned into dinner. But he said two things that were really profound to me in that lunch dinner that we had, 5 hours that we sat around and talked. But he said, ICWA is the only law in the books right now that's reparative. And if you look at the congressional findings of ICWA, it's written to address past harms. It's written to repair, written to heal, written to connect,
Right.
So I think there's some power in medicine in that. But the other thing he said is that it's his words on a paper. It actually takes human beings, you and I, for us to work together to have it reach its highest aspirations. So it takes connection, it takes trust, it takes partnership, and so sometimes that's really tough, of course, with the history that we have as Indigenous peoples and the United States of America. Sometimes that's tough to get a cooperative working relationship sometimes. So I understand that as well.
Right. No, and I was trying to make sure I threw that up there. I believe that this is the website, that you can kind of get more information, regarding, ICWA, things like that. So if you punch this in, but you're right, man. I bet that was amazing just to sit down with him, and because I think that started up, what was it, 78 when all that started? Or
man, you're a student. Yep, that's exactly
that. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. No, I mean, when you I'll be honest with you, Sheldon. Like when you are trying to figure it out, I think you just do everything under the sun, right? And and that's just me. I'm just trying to always figure it out, but. Man, Sheldon, I'm so grateful and thankful for your time, bro. Honestly, I'm a huge fan of yours, and I know that you work very hard in everything that you do, and I'm just really grateful that you. Oh man, okay, yeah. Let me see how I can do this. I think. Oh, whoops. Might have. Oh. Well, can you still?
I'm a fan of you, actually, so I appreciate the work that you're doing, especially providing this platform for us to be able to talk. Like, I think more of this needs to happen, of course. And
right.
So I'm glad you're providing a forum where Native voices get out there. We need to tell our own stories, So I appreciate you doing that and getting on
Oh,
the big
now,
stage with
yeah, we absolutely
the
do.
actors and telling our own story, So that's awesome that you're doing that.
Yeah, and with that, before we get out of here, I mean, it's the honest truth. Like, we have to encourage each other. A lot of times, we don't see that. We don't see people encouraging us. But I just wanted to also plug up there the information that you were referring to here. Um, Great organization here. We want to thank my main man, Sheldon Spotted Elk. First time for you all listening in, viewing in. It's the first time that I ever, really got to, sit and visit with him. I'm a huge fan of yours, Sheldon. I follow you on Instagram. You got a beautiful family, got some bright young men there, and I know that they're going to go far because of the leadership that they have in their household. And again, the big man on campus, 40 under 40 recipient presented by the National Center. I think we're alike like this. Like, I don't like to get a lot of recognition. I don't, I'm for the people, but, in order to fill up, 45 minutes, you have to put all this stuff up here,
Well, I appreciate it, man. Hey, if we're ever in the same county or same town, we need to bring our basketball shoes and go shoot together sometime.
Man,
So,
we can do that as long as you don't want to play, because
no, yeah, not me.
man, no, man, I'm sure we'll one up each other. I'm sure we'll get on the court and be like, yeah, man, back in 2010, there was just 5 of us. There was me. And do you ever notice how you start with me first? There was me. There was Rusty Gillette. There was, but you always start with you.
Yep.
So
that's the way to tell the story.
yeah, man. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Keeping Us Whole, presented by the Administration for Native Americans and Our Native Men, preventing missing and murdered Indigenous persons. Today, we had bossman himself, Sheldon Spotted Elk, with us, Director of Tribal, let me show that, go ahead. Tribal Justice Partnerships National Council for Juvenile and Family Courts, with us today. Don't forget to join us our next podcast. We are going to be welcoming from the Puyallup community. We're going to have Carol DeFord. Carol DeFord will be with us on our episode 1, segment 3. So stay tuned for that. And again, you are listening to Chance with Greatness, presented by the Administration for Native Americans. This was episode 1, segment 2, with Sheldon Spotted Elk on culture and community connectedness. With that being said, we will see you all in the next segment. And Sheldon, man, give him a wave, man. Let him know. All right, guys, we'll see you guys. We're going to see you guys on the next episode. All right.
Please visit the following websites to identify federal resources to assist communities in preventing MMIP: the Administration for Children and Families, ACF, MMNA Framework landing page, https://www.acf.hhs.gov/ANA/MMNA-framework, ACF's Family and Youth Services Bureau Domestic Violence Resource Network, https://www.acf.hhs.gov/FYSB/FV-centers. The Administration for Native Americans Domestic Violence Awareness Public Service Announcements, https://www.acf.hhs.gov/ANA/domestic-violence-PSAs. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Violence Prevention Resource page, https://www.cdc.gov/violence prevention. U.S. Department of the Interior's Indian Affairs Missing and Murdered Unit, www.bia.gov/service/MMU. U.S. Department of Justice MMIP landing page, www.justice.gov/tribal/MMIP. We would like to thank all the speakers for their time, support, and dedicated commitment to the MMIP podcast series. Through continued advocacy and collaboration, we can work together to end the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people, MMIP. The views and opinions of featured speakers on the MMIP podcast series are solely theirs and should not be attributed to the Department of Health and Human Services, the Administration for Children and Families, or the Administration for Native Americans.